Welcome to the eCommerce podcast with Matt Edmondson, a show that brings you regular interviews, tips, and tools for building your business online.
Well, hello and welcome to the eCommerce podcast with me, Matt Edmondson. This show is a podcast dedicated for all of those who are in e-commerce, who have an e-commerce business, who want to do e-commerce in some way, format, shape or other. And it's all designed to help us get better at running our e-commerce businesses. So welcome, my fellow e-commercers, if that makes any sense at all. It's great to have you with us. Tonight we have a very special guest, Neil Roberts, who is the product director from moo.com. And if you'll know what moo.com is. If you haven't, where have you been? But Neil was also the product director for Eurostar. So, you know, some big names following Neil around. So it's going to be great to have him on the show. And we are going to get into customer service, customer focus. We are going to talk about what agile sprints are, how all kinds of stuff. We're going to get into all kinds of stuff. It's going to be really fascinating. I'm really, really looking forward to this one, let me tell you. So Neil will be along in just a minute or two. If you are watching on Facebook as we record this interview, give us a wave, say hello. It's great to see you. Great that you are here and enjoying the broadcast. If you are listening to the show on your podcast app of choice, whether that's through Apple or other, there are of course other makes of mobile phones, whether you're in the car, on the train, in the bus, walking around the park, if lockdown is still carrying on, wherever you are listening to your podcast, it's also great to have you as well. Make sure you subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts from, as we put out weekly content all about how to set up and run and grow and develop your own e-commerce business. And if you don't know already, if it's the first time to the show, well, welcome. It's great to have you here. But if you don't know already, we also broadcast live over Facebook, on Facebook Live, when we record the interview with our special guest, which is just fantastic because we get comments and interaction, which I really, really like. So it's great to do that. And if you would like to watch the future interviews with guests that we have on the show, then make sure you check out our Facebook Live page. Make sure you go to mattedmondson.com and subscribe to the podcast, because we will let you know when podcast recordings are happening live on Facebook via email. We put the notices out on social media. So if you're connected with us, you will know when they're going to happen. And hopefully you can come join in the conversation, which is always great to do. Okay, so at the time of recording, we are still, we're just about to enter June, actually. So lockdown is still going on. COVID is still very much on the lips of people. And e-commerce is very much in high demand. And you know what, I've seen this in my own e-commerce businesses. I've been talking to other e-commerce business owners. I was talking to one guy today. Their demand is shot through the roof, let me tell you, over the last few weeks for their products. And a lot of e-commerce companies are seeing double, triple growth figures at the moment. Some are seeing 20% increases year on year, 30%, whatever it is. E-commerce is a great business it's a great way to service your business at the moment, having an e-commerce outlet. And if you are in the market for a new e-commerce platform, a new e-commerce website, you are, wanting to know which way to turn, which way to go, then make sure you check out this week's show sponsor. Let me give a big shout out to one of our show sponsors, Curious Digital. You know what? I love its flexibility. It's such a great platform. You know how when you start out, you might typically use an online platform because they're cheap, they're easy to use, super accessible. But you know what? They aren't that flexible. And as your business grows, you end up moving to an agency, right? Because that's just what you do. And at some point, you're going to have this nightmare to deal with, and it can be incredibly expensive. And the thing for me that I love about KD is it will grow with you. You can start out on the platform easily, and as your business grows, then KD will adapt with you. Now, I don't know of any other platform that does all of that. So if you're in the market for a new e-commerce platform, make sure you follow the links from mattedmondson.com. Take advantage of the offers that they've got for you, and let me know what you think. A big shout out to another show sponsor, the Lightbulb Agency. These guys basically do those bits of e-commerce that you either don't want to do or don't have the skills or expertise to do, right? It's a great service. Let me tell you, these guys do fulfillment, e-commerce marketing, content creation, customer service, product research. I mean, the list goes on. So if you need help with your own online business, you're looking for ways to grow and you need some help to get there, do get in touch with them. And again, just follow the links from today's show notes. Head on over to mattedmondson.com and you can follow the links to the Lightbulb Agency. We'd love to put you in touch with those guys. For those of you who have been long-time listeners to the show, you will know we have actually, on the sly, you may have picked this up, subtly changed the name of the podcast. It is no longer called the Curiosity Podcast. We just call it the e-commerce podcast with Matt Edmondson. It's a bit more kind of does what it says on the tin type thing. Do you know what I mean? And there's no real reason for the brand change other than it's just a little bit clearer on what it is. The Curiosity Podcast, especially when we spelt it with a K, and a shout out to Curious Digital, our sponsor. People didn't really get that. And so we've changed the name, e-commerce podcast with Matt Edmondson. We are now in season 3, believe it or not. And so it is amazing to be here with you, chatting with you. And let me tell you about tonight's guest on the show. So we have Neil Roberts, and Neil has spent most of the last decade with Eurostar. If you don't know who Eurostar is, basically it's a train company that takes you from London to Paris through the Channel Tunnel, one simple train journey. Amazing. And so he spent the last decade with Eurostar creating digital strategy that builds a great customer experience. So he's got a wealth of experience in digital and building customer experience on digital. He has subsequently moved to mood.com, helping them scale their ambition to bring great design to everyone. And mood.com is a great website if you're looking for things like stationery, business cards, basically print on demand type stuff. I've got some business cards actually. I should have bought them to show you. That was a bit remiss of me, but I'm at home. I'm under lockdown. And the business cards have Seth Godin quotes on the back, which I love, and my details on the front, all from Moo. They do all that sort of stuff, take care of all that design. So without further ado, I'm going to bring in Neil, and this is technically take 2 because, you know, on Monday we tried to do this and technology totally failed. So Neil, welcome to the show. Thank you for being flexible and coming back, and hopefully the technology will work and function for us this time.
Fingers crossed.
That is a sign of a great coder, a man who knows technical. Let's just cross our fingers and hope, because we just genuinely don't know.
I haven't started praying yet. It's just fingers crossed.
Prayer is phase 2.
Yeah.
DEFCON 3. Excellent. How are you doing, Neil?
Yeah, I'm good.
How are you finding the lockdown?
I guess like most people, ups and downs. It's nice to spend a bit of time at home with the family, and then sometimes it's not so nice to spend some time at home with the family.
Yeah, I hear you.
So, you know, there's plenty to be grateful for. Everyone's well and healthy, so I can't really complain.
No, I mean, that, you know, everyone complains about something, don't they? But ultimately, you're right. I'm at home. I'm with the family. We've not killed each other yet. The kids are still talking to me. They're fit. They're well. We're getting on. There's a lot to be thankful for, which I am. You know, very thankful. So I know this isn't in the script, but it's just a question in my head. How do you think business is going to change for Moo post sort of COVID? Do you think it will all return for you guys back to normal, or do you think things will move on a little bit?
I think, as with any business, it will move on. I think Moo are very fortunate in that, I suppose, being a very technology-led business, moving to working remotely was actually pretty smooth. It was sort of 24 hours. And we had the right infrastructure in place to do that. And it had been something that the business has aspired to do, because we have offices in the UK and the US. So we're a bit disparate anyway. So you're a great user of different video conferencing tools.
So you're already partially down this road, and it was
and everything runs off, you know, Google Docs. There are other online.
Just to say, there are other online companies, but we use Google Docs as well.
Yeah.
And Slack.
Yeah. Pardon?
And Slack. Google Docs and Slack. Everything happens in those two environments.
Yeah. And I think it will it's accelerated that kind of transition for us. We were already using, other tools like we use Miro, which is a sort of group facilitation whiteboarding tool, so you can do things like that. And again, there's other tools like Mural and a few others in that space, which are pretty new and exciting, because you can do things that often historically would have been, you have to be in the same space. You can do much more readily with everybody disparate. So I think all of that is going to change, and I think we will become more accepted to do that. And I think people will be a lot more familiar with it. And what I hear in other businesses is who weren't perhaps as far forward in the technology, they've had to adopt it. So I think there's going to be a much broader adopting of those kind of, I suppose, being able to work remotely or work from home much more regularly, or being completely remote. There's lots of jobs that I'm seeing advertised at the moment which is sort of saying completely remote.
Yeah.
So that mental shift has really been accelerated. And then I guess we were predominantly an online business anyway, so I think that's just more of the same. And I'm sure there'll be a shift in the product mix, as there often is. But so we shall see.
We shall wait and see, as they say. Did you work from home a lot anyway before this, or were you more of an office guy?
I think more at Moo than I did at Eurostar. So it's sort of and I think that was a cultural thing, because it was more, I suppose, just accepted. It was the norm to do that. But probably regularly 1 day a week, occasionally 2 days a week, but probably not more than that. So it'll be interesting to see if that tips. I've got friends that even before COVID were working from home, either permanently or 3 or 4 days a week. Yeah. Mainly coders that tend to get away with that.
Well, they actually prefer to be just head down and focused in, don't they? And they don't want the distraction of the office. I think one of the things that I don't think I've solved yet, but is one of the questions sort of in the back of my mind, is I get that people are going to work more from home. And we have sort of an open plan office. And it's actually quite a nice working environment. And one of the things that I love about our office is we would often have what I don't know where I've picked this term up, but the water cooler moments. Do you know what I mean? Where you would go, you'd make a cup of tea, you'd turn the kettle on, and you'd just get talking to one of your co-workers, and an idea would form. It wasn't a planned meeting; it was a spontaneous thing, and something would happen. That magic, that spark, or even just a simple, "Hey, how are you?" Do you know what I mean? How you doing? Because when we're on Zoom all the time, it just tends to be business. It's not, "Hey, how are you doing?" Do you know what I mean? And so I'm curious to see how we keep that aspect of work in a remote setting, if that makes sense. I don't know if you've got any experience on that. Yeah,
I was listening to a podcast the other week while I was going for a ride, and they were talking about exactly this. It was what was it? Mind the Product, I think was the podcast, and they had a facilitation coach on, an agile coach. And she was talking about how to build communities remotely. And they were talking about, because you don't have those accidental interactions, how to recreate it. And I think it's one of those things that's perhaps slightly more foreign, is how to have a social conversation. And what they talked about is when you're running a session, actually thinking about structuring so that you have an introduction. So not icebreakers as in some of the crazy games that you can do. But
if you were an animal, which one would you be?
So not those, but more giving everybody in the group an opportunity to introduce themselves and talk about what they want to get out of that meeting or session. And then intermittently having different sort of icebreakers, which are like get something from the house that is a fridge magnet was the example that they used, because often if you have them, they tell a story and you can get to know the person a bit more.
That's a great idea. And that was called Mind the Product. I might have a little listen to that.
Yeah, Mind the Product. So they do a whole series of product-based and around agile and agile coaching. So they do events and conferences, a lot of online content. And they're really good.
That'd be really interesting.
Focus around the facilitation stuff.
Yeah. No, I'll have a listen to that. I'll have a think, because that fascinates me. Because one of the things I think is going to happen with this sort of online working is actually, because we are more now willing to have remote workers, it means actually, we talked to in the last podcast to Jesse about this, about how he's an American who lives in the Philippines, but his team are basically all over the world. And this is now starting to become much more the norm. And so you're getting access to a much different type of person by being a remote working organization. You're sort of opening up the doors from the geographical sense. We're based in Liverpool, and one of the things that, Liverpool's got a great digital culture, but man, do you have to pay the developers a lot of money if you want the good ones. Do you know what I mean? And actually all of a sudden this sort of flings the door open, and it makes what you do accessible to a whole bunch more people.
Yeah, I think it does. And I think I live down in Kent, and I worked in a regional business as well. So I felt the challenges of trying to build teams that are in regional locations. And it can be difficult if you don't have, I suppose, a network of businesses around you with a similar skill. So when you're in a city, you've often got lots of businesses that can help. You can borrow people from and that sort of stuff. But when you're more regional, it's much harder. But yeah, remote working makes a big difference.
Yeah.
So you access expertise irrespective of where you are. So it should make a big difference to a lot of businesses. And maybe a less focus on the cities, which can't be a bad thing.
No, and yeah, I say no and yes, following it, that doesn't make any sense as in this. I've just heard that back in my head. What are you talking about? But I think you're right. I think I'm really like I say, I'm really curious to see where all this plays out. And so I thank you for the wisdom of that podcast, and I will share it. And I like those ideas. Really, really intriguing at the moment, how it's all going to play out. So Neil, you mentioned, and I've mentioned, that you work for Moo. Just tell everybody, I gave a brief intro to what it is, but what is Moo, moo.com? You're in the UK, you're in the States, but what is it for those that don't know?
Yeah, so Moo is about 13 years old, and it was one of the original startups around Silicon Roundabout, Old Street. So, they're in a single office with a big printer downstairs.
I like, by the way, how in the UK we have Silicon Roundabout, and in the States they have a whole valley. We just have a roundabout. And if the Americans listen to the show right now going, what's a roundabout?
Yeah, probably. Yeah. Yeah, mind-boggling. But there's a small area within London where the startup scene was 13 odd years ago, and Richard founded the business, and it was basically small business cards with a unique shape. He partnered with Flickr. And you could put your image on the back of the cards, and you can have different images on the different back of the cards. And it was really popular within what we call the Soho community, so small office, home office, and particularly with artists and photographers, because they could use the business cards as a portfolio. And out of that's grown a business card and marketing materials. So everything that is print-based, really. Still, business cards is a core part of the business, but we do, leaflets and notebooks and all that sort of stuff, but always with a focus on the quality of design and the quality of materials. So we do a great Lux line, which is actually a number of pieces of card that are laminated with a seam around it, and it makes it a really tactile and noteworthy product, so people actually comment on it. And all delivered through an online platform, so you can design your own or use some of our templates that we built for you and adapt them. So the idea is that you can democratize good design. So design, I struggled with that.
That's fine. I would too.
So that it's more accessible. So if you're a small business and you don't have the print expertise or the design expertise, that we can make that accessible, and you can customize it so that you can, I suppose, be true to the business that you're trying to build and get access to skills that you wouldn't have. And it's great.
No, it is. And I said at the start that I'm a customer of Moo, and I have to be honest, these days I really rarely give out business cards. It's just a different world, isn't it? When I first started in business, every man and his dog said to you, "What should give me a business card?" But people just don't do that anymore. But the business cards that I got with the Seth Godin quotes on there, they're the ones which everybody commented on.
Yeah.
they became a talking point, and people almost put them up on the wall. Do you know what I mean? Because they liked the quote on the back. And so I think what you guys do is great. I am a customer, just, full disclosure. And I'm not being paid to say that.
I'm similar. I've still got business cards from a business that I was working in 10 years ago, stuck in a drawer, because I was so proud and loved them so much.
They're hard to throw out, aren't they? They're hard to throw out. It's really bizarre. Even when they become outdated, they're hard to throw out. I get that. It's a strange thing. So that's what Moo does, but what's your role at Moo? I use the phrase product director, but what is a product director?
It's a very good question.
I was still trying to find out the answer.
Well, I think it's very much, it's defining the what and the why of what you should build or how you could improve. You can have it in the physical product world. So, business cards, for example, or cycle helmets. There will be a product person defining what that product should be and what the proposition should be. And in the software world, as it often does, it's adopted or borrowed or stolen that terminology. And it's really trying to work out what's for the software product, what is it you need to build and why do you need to build it? And you're quite often the middle person sort of working with the engineering teams and working with the business part, the commercial part of the business and the UX and designers and bringing everybody together to get a consensus or at least a joined up strategy of what you should be delivering and why. And that's what I do. So work very closely with the designers and the user experience and user researching people to understand what the customer needs are, and looking at the existing product and working with the analysts to see how that's performing and looking for opportunities to make it better. And that's what I do.
That sounds fascinating. I like that phrase, the what and the why, trying to understand what and why. What are some of the things then working at Moo that maybe have surprised you that you've discovered?
Sounds really cheesy, but just how nice the people are.
We like cheese. Cheese works.
Yeah, but genuinely, Richard's built a culture there where it's just a really positive culture. So really investing in people and help focusing on how they work together and making a pleasant working environment. And I suppose the bit that I'm really fascinated in, as well as that, is the physical product. So in the middle of the London office is where the real product people are.
The real product people.
As in, but like they
I know what you mean, yeah.
You can touch. And so you've got all of the materials everywhere. And they've got all these little prototypes that they put together and are testing with people. And I think that was a new thing for me to see, I suppose, the more traditional product design and development process and be able to see it in the heart of the office. Yeah. And when you talk to them, it's utterly fascinating in how they go in and the effort they go into research materials and manufacturers, looking at how can we make something, with less or no plastic and make things out of hemp, or as they did a few years ago, out of recycled cotton t-shirts. So how they could use the remnants from cuts out of t-shirts and refactor them into business cards and other materials. And it's just, I think that's what surprised me, is the depth of thought that goes into all sorts of things, even the notebooks. And so the notebooks, so you look at this, and when they opened it, you can see the spine comes off. And this is all sort of stitched along the side, but that's so that when you open it and write on it, it's flat and you don't get that crease on them. And the attention to detail,
extraordinary.
So I think it's that.
I'm going to have to try one of those notebooks. I am a bit of a pen and notebook fan, I have to be honest. And I can't pronounce, I don't know how I pronounce the brand of my notebook. Liechtenstein. I'm really sorry that I've gone and butchered that brand. But I've tried very many different notebooks. So if you've got a great notebook, I will definitely be trying one, because a good notebook is essential, I think, to any career. Yeah. A good pen and a good notebook. Why would you not have one? So how long have you been with Moo now?
I think just shy of 2 years.
Okay. So do you feel like you're still new in the post, or do you feel like you kind of established?
I think getting more established. I think it's the nature of sort of a younger business and a business that's growing, and things change all the time. So it's definitely, it's not boring.
These things never are. Eh? One of the things that you said actually in our pre-call that I've written down in my notes here, and I would love for you to expand on it further because it really piqued my interest. Now, this is obviously an e-commerce show, an e-commerce podcast, and Moo has an e-commerce site,
They do,
and that's how you generate your business, right? And you said people don't come to us because of the e-commerce experience, but because of our physical product. In other words, they come to the site because they want to buy the physical product, not because of the e-commerce experience. But they couldn't get the product without having the e-commerce experience.
Yeah.
And I thought they were very wise words, and I thought that was a really interesting tension. So how do you balance that?
I think it's an ongoing balancing act, and I think for sort of on the digital product side of things, it is you have to put, I suppose, understand the what your customers are after. So if you're truly customer led, it does mean perhaps that you recognise where your position is in the pecking order of their desires. Is they come for the physical product, and my role there then is to make it easy to understand and access that product, almost get out of their way. So I have the, I suppose, benefit of working with a great physical product business, but I have the risk that if I get it wrong, I can actually devalue the whole brand experience. So, for example, if it's really difficult to find stuff, then people will get frustrated, or if they can't, or if the site doesn't work, then it can actually be damaging to the brand. And particularly a company like Moo that positions itself in the quality and the design aspects of it, we have to live up to the brand in the e-commerce side of things. We couldn't do, a really, ugly site, for example, because it wouldn't fit with a brand. And if it doesn't work, and if it isn't smooth, then customers let us know. They expect a standard that is equivalent to the quality that they get in the business cards and the notebooks. So I think it's just knowing why people come there. I think if I was working for Spotify, that is, well, even there actually they come for the media. But
they come for the music.
Yeah.
Or the podcasts, obviously, if you're listening to this on Spotify.
Podcasts but there's a real opportunity to help the business grow by getting that experience right. But it is not everything. And if you look at Netflix, Amazon, and all the sort of predecessors that were in the sort of streaming section, there is a reason that Netflix is the biggest. Is actually the user interface is, I feel, more elegant. Oh,
it's unbelievable. Yeah, it's chalk and cheese, isn't it?
Yeah, but also they have the right content and the right volume of content as well. So you need both.
So you need this sort of great product, but you need a mechanism to demonstrate that product in a way which is almost out of the way, I think was the phrase you used. You want to get out of the customer's way, make it easy for them to understand the product. And for Moo, that, if I'm understanding you right, Neil, for Moo, that is about design on the site, matching up to the design of the actual products. Obviously, you can't have an incoherent or an incongruous sort of website and physical product, but also making that experience seamless. And I think that's a great sort of description, when we're thinking about our e-commerce websites, is actually, it's not about the website. It's about the products that people are buying. And the website is secondary to that in some respects and needs to make the whole process of getting that product congruous, but it also needs to be almost invisible.
Yeah, and it's the balance between aesthetic and function. One of the examples I always use is corkscrews. So there are, I think, probably 1 million design corkscrews.
I think I've probably got half of those in my kitchen, to be fair.
But there's probably two go-tos. So there's one which is the waiter's friend, which is that small one that folds up that all the waiters. It has the foil cutter and everything, and it just works. And then the other one I like is the one with the arms that you can sort of, you screw it down and then do that. And
the lady in the dress.
Yeah. So you can have the most beautiful and elegant looking product, But if it doesn't perform the function you purchased it for, it stays in the drawer and you never use it.
Yeah.
And the website's the same. So as a product, its job is to present the product and get you through that journey to take your money as efficiently and effectively as possible. And so that's the purpose. So you need to balance the aesthetic with the function. And if we don't get the function right, it doesn't matter what it looks like. Mm-hmm. And it's the same in the physical product experience as it is in the customer experience. If you don't get that base reason that customers come to you right, it doesn't matter what else you do. You can't really recover it.
No, that's great. That's great. So, I think that's very good advice for anybody running an e-commerce business, is to understand the purpose of the e-commerce website. In relation to the actual products you're selling, whether they're physical products or digital products. People ultimately are there to buy the product. They're not there to experience the e-commerce website. Yeah. But they have to get the product. And I like that way of thinking. Again, in our pre-call, we talked about how at Moo you have quite a strong agile culture in terms of this development and growing things and moving things forward. But again, hang on, before I get into that quote, because I thought it was a great quote and I'm going to pull it up in a second. Let's just explain to the listeners what agile is, just in case they don't know, and why it was part of the culture at Moo. Yeah.
So there are multiple ways of building software. The more traditional one is something called waterfall, which is a sort of phased project management process. So you'll define the product, you'll scope it out. Probably the best analogy is to think of if you're building a house. So talk to an architect and a draftsman, and they would build up the blueprints. And you'd talk about where the rooms are going to go and where the toilet will be and all that sort of stuff. And then you progress on to, you lock that down, and that's rigid. And then you lock down and you give it over to the builders, and they go and build it against the plans. That's and you can do that same process with software, and lots of software projects still work in exactly that same way, which I think works really well when you know the outcome that you're going for. So if you know that it's going to be 4 bedrooms and you know how much you're going to spend. The challenge in that way of building software, and actually in the same way of building houses, is at the start of the project is when you know the least. So working out how much it's going to cost, what the labor costs are going to be, is extraordinarily difficult. And invariably what happens is you go through the process that you find something that was unforeseen, that you didn't expect. Something's a bit difficult. Yep. With our house, we found that the previous guy had done the plumbing and the toilet, and he hadn't done it particularly well, and it was eroding the corner of the house.
Oh, that's not good.
Not good. But, we couldn't once we found that, we couldn't not deal with it.
Yeah. So you have, I'm with you here. Fix that.
We could, but I wouldn't be sat here now in it. And the same happens with software projects. And so agile is, so waterfall works. And I think there's, if you look at some of the project management philosophies, like Prince 2, which is one of the more, I suppose, document heavy, process heavy, It has its place. So if you're building a military aircraft, you probably want that rigor to make sure that it works well, because the risks, the consequences of it not working are life-threatening. Yeah. But then if you move into something where perhaps the risk is lower, but also where the outcome is less certain. So if you're trying to solve them, and so, put at Netflix, for example, as an example. So they originally, I remember, went in to pitch, or the urban myth is they went to pitch to blockbusters. Yeah. And what about this live streaming thing? They probably at that stage had no idea how to use the technology, what the user interface was going to be, how to get traction with people, whether people would actually develop it. So the outcome of what they were building was very uncertain of how they were going to do it, but the vision was there. And Agile works with that because it's an iterative process. It has different methodologies you can use. So one of them is Scrum. And under that process, you go in 2-week sprints or short sprints, and you take a small module and you build it, and then you push it out and you test it with real customers. And you can do prototyping before, but the idea is you take a small iteration rather than spending 12 months building the amazing piece and then testing it. You de-risk the project by doing a small increment, putting it to market. Does it work? If it works, you keep it. If it doesn't work, you get rid of it and you go for the next iteration. So it's this constant learning process. So when you're not clear on the outcome, it's a better, faster, cheaper actually way of finding what works. And that's kind of where it's born out of. So a lot of Silicon Valley and software companies trying to build and iterate and learn and evolve their product rather than having a big vision and spending 2 years building it, and then you put it to market and no one wants it.
No one understands it, no one gets it. Yeah, no, I appreciate that. So that's agile. And the thing that you said, the quote that I loved was, agile is great where you're, and you've actually just said it a little bit again, agile is great where you're breaking new ground. Otherwise, waterfall works really well.
Yeah.
And it's kind of, I guess, understanding which one is where you're at.
Yeah, and there's a guy, I don't know if I mentioned this before, there's a guy called Dave Snowden. He's an academic, and he has a process called Cynefin. It's a Welsh word, so it's spelt differently to, I would say it, but Cynefin. I can't spell it, but it begins with a C. But if you Google Dave Snowden, he's the thought leader on that piece, and it looks at, it's a decision-making model. So it looks at the problem you're trying to solve. Is it simple and well understood? And therefore, then there's probably a process that will allow you to do that efficiently. Yeah. And if it's complex and not well understood, then actually you probably want to lean towards something like agile, because it will allow you to evolve and learn. And in time, when that space is well understood, maybe it will move to something where a process would optimize what you're doing. Yeah. And so, it's 5, 6, 7 years ago, I spent a lot of my time being told agile's the thing. We all need to be agile. We need to do that stuff. And just blindly taking a methodology and applying it to your circumstance, to your organization, I don't think really works. So you just
didn't really make sense, did it? No. And we were part of that, actually. Part of that story is like everybody was agile. Everybody read the book Scrum. Everyone's like, oh, now we need to be Scrum. We need to be agile. We need to do this. We need to do that. And it's like, goodness me. And you had to work. You then had to go and get a consultant in to explain what all the different terminologies meant, because they renamed absolutely everything. Yeah. And so you're right. But I thought this was a really good breakdown. It's like, should I be agile? Yes or no? And I liked your phrase. If you're breaking into new ground, look at agile. Otherwise, don't reinvent the wheel. You don't need to just go with a well-documented process. Learn from what other people have said. Funnily enough, here Sean's written in the Facebook comments, God, I have a headache. The more I learn, the more questions I have. And I think, you know what? That's my life every day, Sean, to be fair, when it comes to digital.
That is life, isn't it? Yeah. It's kind of... There's a book, I think it's called Mindset. It talks about growth mindset and fixed mindset. And the concept is that you can learn most things, but depending on your intelligence level and your ability, it might take you a bit longer, but the brain and the body does evolve, so you can learn stuff. So, I think if you want to, you can learn till you go to the grave, new things, new ideas, put them together and more stuff. And we're always going to be learning. I think that's interesting, isn't it?
We are. As long as, and I don't think this is what you mean, as long as it's not that case of, I see this all the time, people spend all their life learning and hardly any time doing. Do you know what I mean? You know the kind of people that I mean. In fact, if you're listening to this, you will all know the kind of person that I mean. They spend all their time learning and never any time doing, and there has to be that balance. So moving on, you've got agile, this sort of agile culture, and you said when we talked last time, you called it the Spotify model at Moo. You had this Spotify model. What do you mean by that?
So the Spotify model is, I think, in essence, it was a concept that's probably 6 or 7 years ago, which was popularized by Spotify as the way that they were looking at their organizational design at the time. And what they were trying to do is scale the product development so they could have multiple streams of work. And it was kind of a matrix structure. So you had different crews or squads, and the idea was each one of those units would be autonomous.
Yeah.
But they had the ability to understand the problem they were trying to fix, and they had all the resources they needed to actually then go and fix it and put it into market. So they'd have a designer, a UX person, engineers, front end, back end, QAs, testers, that sort of stuff.
There's about 8 people, wasn't there, in a particular group? They were quite small groups, weren't they? They weren't massive.
No larger than 2 pizzas is the sort of the phrase that comes out. The number of people that you could feed with 2 pizzas.
Depends if you get them from Asda or Domino's. But anyway, it's it's a sort of the small groups, and they each group is autonomous, and they have a very clear problem which they're trying to solve, or a very clear thing that they're working on, don't they?
Yeah, so you might have someone who, for example, is focused on focus on that of a new software product with Spotify. How do we you have someone who focuses as you get sure that the transaction part is really smooth and clean, and focus on different payment providers to make sure that the transactions are successful more often than not, and fraud prevention and all that sort of stuff. So each area, each team has its own mission and part of the application that it could focus on and make that part of the experience. So the idea is that you can scale up that organization much more readily as your business grows or your application grows. And then they have a kind of matrix structure across it, which is looking at guilds and chapters, and that's to share the learnings between the different specialisms and the different teams. So you kind of end up with this sort of matrix structure. And yeah, that was what Moo had until very recently. So we tried to adopt that.
Okay, but you guys have moved away from that.
Yeah, and as I believe Spotify have as well.
Yeah. So what have you found that worked well for you guys, and maybe what didn't work as well?
Yeah, I think there's more to just the way you organize your people to actually making agile work. And I found this with Eurostar. So Eurostar, we had a couple of re-platforming projects in the time I was there. And where it worked was on the third time, where we built the software in the right way. So it was in components. It was a train company, so we used to use the language of components that were loosely coupled, like a train. So carriages in a train, so they know how to work together. But if you want to take one out and replace it with something new, you can. That's important to give the teams autonomy, so they need to be able to work on their level part of the application without negatively impacting other people. So you need the software to be built in the right way, and then the organization reflects it. And what some of the moves has some challenges is the software isn't universally built in the right way. So it meant you have teams that were set up to work autonomously, but actually they couldn't work on a discrete piece of the code base without negatively impacting multiple teams, which increased the sort of coordination and communication overhead of doing it. So that was one of the challenges that we had, probably the biggest challenge, because the software wasn't as elegantly designed. It had evolved with the business as it had grown. So that was a real challenge for us. So you kind of almost had a negative effect that we were, with the intention of creating autonomous teams, we'd created an environment where they had to spend a lot of time talking and liaising between each other, increasing the overhead of doing that. But one of the benefits that we had, I think, was the chapters and the guilds, so the continuous learning between those teams, and particularly the agile chapter, which are a great facilitator for that. So the learning culture was really really good, and that kind of, so we differentiate. So a chapter, as I understand it, is where you have, say, a group of product managers. And the idea is that they're trying to learn from each other's experiences and share learning to improve how they do product management as a group. And you'll have this with front-end engineers or designers UX people, so they're doing that. And a guild is more open than that. So anyone that has an interest in perhaps usability can come and join. So if you were in the sales team, but you were curious about how it worked, you could be part of a guild. Or the way that we used it in the wider organization, so we might have things around the culture, around diversity. So we would have a guild around diversity. And it was just a group of people that were interested in improving the diversity and culture in the business, and they would pull together to learn and implement initiatives across the business and improve stuff.
Wow.
So that was really positive. And I think when you're in a business that is growing, they're really useful ways to organize yourself, to share learning and speed up the learning so that everybody grows at the same kind of
grows with the company, don't they? And people don't get left behind. How many people work at Moo?
It's around 600.
Oh, wow. So it's a pretty sizable, I don't even know what that means, but it's a pretty sizable organization. So you need, you can see why that would work really well for you guys. Definitely. Yeah. So let's move on to the sort of the customer focus aspect of life, Neil, if we can. Sort of talk about that side of things. And again, one of the phrases that you used in our pre-podcast call, which you kept using, which I quite like, and I've heard it before, is this whole surprise and delight idea, that customer focus, surprise and delights. What do you mean by that? Or what do you think is meant by that is maybe a better question.
Yeah. So when I was at Eurostar, that's where that phrase was used most often. So I spent a lot of time working with the physical customer experience and the customer experience team. Mm-hmm. And that was a phrase that was used quite a lot. So the idea is that within customer experiences, we should be surprising our customers and giving them a delightful experience. And I think where the risk of using that and focusing on that. So for example, if you give people a free cup of tea or some sunglasses or whatever, they might initially be quite delighted. So there's some Eurostar glasses that actually my kids have still got, bright yellow, and they were great. Yeah. People were really delighted and they hang around. But actually, they weren't going to build loyalty. They weren't going to get someone to book another trip.
They would just say, okay, that's nice. That's cool.
Yeah, that's cool. And
so what? Yeah. So what?
And so if you look into customer experience in a broader thing and the sort of processes and thoughts around how that works, it's a pyramid. And right at the top of the pyramid is the surprise and delight sorts of things to add that extra, touch. Yeah. And there in the hotel industry, they talk about it's the last experience, which can be your lasting experience. So it's how the doorman says goodbye to you and opens your door and that sort of stuff. But they're right at the top. Yeah. But if you don't get the fundamental service right, so in the Eurostar experience, if the train is late or it's cancelled, it doesn't matter how many pairs of sunglasses I give you.
It's not going to help. Yeah.
It's not going to make a blind bit of difference. Yeah. And it's not as sexy to sort those sorts of things out. But it's absolutely critical that you get it right, because if you don't get the base layers and build your way up through this, to make right. So in software, get it to work. If it doesn't work, it doesn't matter what it looks like. Mm-hmm. Whether it's easy to use. If I can't use it, so we would spend a lot of time looking at errors. So putting in error handling to understand where the software wasn't working. So we got visibility of all of those errors. Because when I started at Eurostar, we would get visibility of the website errors through the contact center. That's a really good place to get some feedback when you don't have the error handling in the software, but it's a terrible customer experience because they're on there in the evening. They want to book their trip for their business trip the next day, and the site lets them down. And then it's our fault, and it's a terrible customer experience, and Eurostar's rubbish. It's really important to get that visibility of how it's performing, functioning, and then you can look at how to make it easy, and then you can make it delightful, and then you can start surprising people. But if you don't do it,
that's a really good hierarchy, and I like that, because, like you say, people want to move straight to the sexy. because it's sexy.
All the time, every time. People get excited about.
Yeah, but the fundamentals have got to be right first. I like that. That's a great. I often talk about the opening experience at Jersey and with clients when I do coaching. And what I mean by this is when you deliver a parcel to your customer, or when DHL or whoever you've used to deliver that parcel, the first time they hold that box is their first physical interaction with your business. Everything up until that point has been pixels. Do you know what I mean? And now they're touching something and it's real and it's genuine and it's, and it's in front of them. And it's at that point you've really got to pay attention to how that customer feels. Did it turn up late? Did it turn up on time? Is the box in bits? Was the courier rude to them? Do you know what I mean? These are the fundamentals, aren't they, which people just don't think about or talk about. But when they get hold of that box, how are they feeling? Do you know what I mean? And what's the emotions that they have? Because you can put all the sexy stuff inside the box that you like, but the fundamentals are, if this box is battered, the courier was rude and it's 14 days late and I've had to call 24 times just to get it. Yeah. There's an issue, isn't there?
Yeah, and you'd have that Move, for example. So Move, with Move, we spend a lot of time. I don't, but the physical product guys, getting when you open the box, that it makes that sort of sucking feel.
The Apple iPhone box feel, isn't it?
Yeah, so that it feels quality, but also a lot of time spent on time to manufacture, so that when we're making a promise. That you can have your business cards or marketing materials, because often it's event driven, the reason you're buying it. If it turns up a day after that event, or even an hour after you have to leave, that's, it's a fail, a complete fail. Or if it turns up with a spelling mistake or whatever, then that's a complete fail. And so we have the Moo promise that if you're not satisfied in any way, even if it's a mistake that you've made, that we'll reprint it free of charge to deliver on that experience as best we can. But also we spend a lot of time looking at couriers and making sure that the couriers can fulfill the time that we're talking about every time, so that they can actually, that the product gets to the customer when they need it. And that's, I think, why you used to do this a lot at Eurostar, but at Moo is just as important. Any e-commerce business is just as important. Is think about the products that you're selling, and also the context in which they're going to be used. And that's where the interest in design thinking comes from. Is you need to understand the context of how it's being used and the purpose your customer's going to use it for, to make sure that it's a good product and that it's packaged right and what's important to them. And often you'll find with a premium product that people will be prepared to wait, or there's some sort of part of your proposition. I can remember listening to, was it Gerald Ratner, who used to run Ratner's The Jewelers. He had a new business venture, and basically what it was is he had selling through television, but really cheap. So they sort of those advertorial type things. But it would really be really cheap, cheaper than you could get in the high street. But the trade-off was it would take you 2 or 3 weeks to receive it. And so what he'd understood is there was a segment of the market that was prepared to wait to have
cheap,
a certain quality but cheap. And he said the guys in the factory would literally be watching the show as well, to make sure, so they knew what they were about to manufacture. But also changed the business model as well, because they didn't have any stock, so what that allowed them, and
that's why they could do it cheaper, because they didn't actually have to have the stock.
That's where Made.com, the way that they worked is they would only fulfill an order once they'd actually got a container full of purchases already happening, and the trade-off was you could get really well designed furniture, but at a fraction of a price. That was the origins of Made.
It's a clever way of doing it, a clever way of thinking. It's it's an interesting model, because people will wait. There's no doubt about it. People will wait.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. So we were laughing about this beforehand, Neil, and we've got to that stage in my notes where it says other toilet example. And we were both going, what do we mean by, from our original conversation, what did we mean by other toilet example? Do you want to talk about that? I think you do now, because everyone who's listening to the show or watching is going, what are they talking about? Toilets?
I'm so glad I caught up just before we got. Otherwise, I would have gone, I've got no idea.
Yeah.
So this comes back. So this is when I was at Eurostar, the digital strategy that we were devising was not just e-commerce of how can you sell the tickets and how do you expand reach and how do you make the online purchasing experience or retention or ticket issuing experience foolproof, but it blended into the what I would call the real world. So when you're in the station and you arrive and your battery on your mobile's gone flat, or you've forgotten your ticket, or the train's been cancelled, and how could technology help with that? And so when you're working on that kind of strategy, the best way that I've come up with that kind of strategy, whether it's an overall customer experience strategy or a digital strategy or the blending of the two, is something called design thinking or human-centered design, which is one of the great thought leaders around this is a company called IDEO. IDEO. And they do some really accessible, quite reasonably priced online courses. Mm-hmm. And what they look at is a series of very cheap techniques, if you do it yourself, to try and understand how people use your product or service and how you can improve it. And design thinking is you go through and you look at how people use the service. It's not a great example for toilets because that would be a bit weird. But it sort of talks about, we were talking about the difference between men's toilets where there's rarely a queue and women's toilets where there's often a queue. Yep. And I'm reading a book which was about sort of data biases and the invisible influence that has on gender bias, particularly towards women. And they used an example of toilets. So when you think about how to design a building with a toilet facility for men and women, you think, okay, roughly 50-50 population split. So we're expecting a similar volume of men and women. So we'll give them the same square footage for a toilet.
Yeah, equal size toilets.
And that's fair, except for the ergonomics of the male body and the ergonomics of the female body are different. Mm-hmm. So you can actually you can use the toilet as a man quite easily standing up. For men. I'm trying to politely say.
Yeah, we're trying to dance around in case there's kids listening in the car. What's he talking about, man? What's he talking about? I don't know.
But the point is, you can get more facilities per square foot for a man in the general way that they use a toilet than you can for a woman. Yeah. But also other things, the unseen bias around the data is that often women will be the primary carer, whether it's for an elderly person or for a child, who will be there with them. So you can get urinals in with cubicles for men. In women's toilets, it's generally, I haven't spent a lot of time in them, but generally it's all cubicles, but often they will have a dependent with them, which means that it takes longer. So therefore the dwell time in the toilet is longer. Mm-hmm. Therefore the same square footage isn't sufficient. Therefore you get queues. Yeah. And you only get this insight by actually walking the walk and using the experience in the same way. And it's something the Japanese used in Gemba walks, was where you get, so in manufacturing in the 50s, one of the ideas they had was get the execs down and actually get them to experience the manufacturing floor to see how it works. And Sainsbury's, I think, do this every Christmas.
Yeah, they do. Yeah.
Office to help, and then you see the problems firsthand and you get a lot more empathy for them, and then you actually sort them out. Rather than,
there's actually a whole bunch of TV shows about it now, isn't there, where they make the CEO of large companies go and work on the shop floor, or the factory floor, and he understands his business in a very different way once he's done that. Was it Undercover Boss? I think is what. Yeah, that's the one I was thinking of. Yeah.
So when I was a kid, I used to watch with my dad. This sounds really sad. I should have been out playing with cars or something, or football. It's Sir John Harvey Jones, who was the chairman of ICI. Yeah. And he did a series called The Troubleshooter, and I still remember it today. And he used to do that. And he went to Morgan Cars and just looked around and going, so why do you build the chassis on this side of the road, a public road, and then stick it on a trailer and wheel it across a public road to the other side where you put, and all of these sorts of, it was like,
that's just how we were told to do it, but that's
exactly. Yeah.
And it intrigues me because, I mean, going back to the toilets, is we still in modern 21st century Britain have this issue where, I mean, I was mentioning it to you, you know, we have a fairly new John Lewis building in Liverpool. And the queues are always greater for the ladies' toilets than the men's toilets. And somehow we've not quite figured this out yet. We still create for ourselves the same problem because no one's taken this step back and thought, hang on a minute. We need to think about this differently, or we need to look at this differently, or we need a different type of response, or we need to design this differently.
Or use it, and then you get the experience that your customer has, and then you know how to improve it. And that's what the design thinking kind of process is, you know, interviewing and observing. So at Eurostar, we used to get customers to do video diaries of their journey, so we could see it firsthand. We would shadow the train managers, trains and station staff when there was a disruption, and this was probably where you learnt the most. When you've had 15 trains cancelled on an Easter weekend, you'd get drafted in to help the station staff deal with the fallout of that, and then all right, that IT system falls over when in volume, or I can't reissue tickets from a third party. And you get a completely different insight and genuinely improve the product or service that you're delivering.
So in effect, what you're saying is, and because in my head I'm thinking this is great, but how does this apply for someone who's running an e-commerce business? You've got to actually get in the trenches, haven't you? You talk about shadowing your customers, talking to your customers, walking the walk, have parcels delivered to yourself. What it's that kind of thing, isn't it?
Yeah, so online so there are some very expensive tools that you can use which can capture, every interaction on your website. So if you've got big budgets, you can go through and you can capture all of that stuff, and you can almost play back the sessions that people have had. Yep. I mean, if you're a big organization, then that's maybe worth investing if you've got the revenues coming through.
There's actually a tool you can use that's free. That does the same thing called Hotjar. I don't know if you've come across that. Yeah,
Hotjar. Yeah, same thing. Yeah, and so you can earn. And when I used to start, I did this pre-Eurostar. First time I did this, it was all free and sort of $99 tools that we used to use.
Yeah. That's interesting. At Eurostar, a big, massive organization, you were using free and $99 tools to measure customer engagement.
To start off with, because I had to prove a business case. No one was going to give me, tens of thousands of pounds to implement this thing that they didn't understand. So literally we would use, and we still now use things like usertesting.com, where you can recruit people to use your website and they agree to be videoed, and they'll do a dialogue as you do it. And you learn so much through that. And I've used that everywhere that I've worked in e-commerce to see where
usertesting.com.
Yeah, usertesting.com. Hotjar allows you to do it in a bit of scale, and also Google Analytics. So when we did the first replatforming Eurostar, we used the free version of Google Analytics because we'd had the expensive. My predecessor had implemented the really, really expensive top-notch solution, but nobody understood how to get insight out of it. Right. So we flipped it on its head and said, we'll have the absolute minimum, and then when we find that we're reaching the limit of those features, then we'll talk about whether we upgrade.
Yeah.
There's a guy called Avanish Kaushik who works for Google as an evangelist, or he used to, in analytics, and he said generally as a ratio of how much you spend on the analytics tool versus the analysts should be 9-1.
Okay.
So if you don't have someone looking at the data, so whether that's your user testing, your session replay, or your analytics, if there's no one looking at it, you're probably wasting your money.
Yeah.
So start with the free tools and invest in the good people to actually get you the insight and find out where those friction points are. That's still every business that I've worked in the last 15 years, I would say that has absolutely been the way that I've approached it. And we've found some really good results.
So what sort of things would you look for then in Google Analytics? What sort of things would throw out the warning signs?
So you can work out whether you start at the top of the funnel or the bottom. And where I've tended to look at is at the bottom. So the people that have gone through the process, that are committed, they've selected something, put something in their basket, and you're looking at that conversion funnels. Where are the drop-offs? Mm-hmm. So the problem you're trying to solve is, why don't I get 100% of the people to that
ever elusive,
and click to pay? And what you find out is, and then you do more user research and you understand more about your customers, is at the top of the funnel, not everyone's coming to buy. Mm-hmm. So sometimes they're going, right, is this a credible website? And you pass the brand kind of thing. So they're looking for recognition. And there's a great book on this, I think it's called Always Be Testing, which talks a lot about how Amazon constructs web pages and the different personas that they design their pages for. And it still seems to be in the architecture of their pages now. Mm. You've got different users coming at different stages of their purchasing path with different needs and motivations. So the reason you can, on an Amazon page, see the product, the price, and press buy above the fold is for the people that know what they want to buy, want to confirm the price, and they want to get out there as quickly as possible and buy it. If you go down the page, the people that are researching and thinking about, is this the right product for me? Is this the right vendor for me? There's more and more detail the deeper you go down.
Yep.
We've all met the really detailed-oriented people that will read 1,000 reviews and they will compare 400 products. And it's for those sorts of people so that they have the depth of information as well. But you get out of the way that people that know what they want and they just want to buy it.
Yeah, and you make it quick for them.
Yeah, so at the top of the funnel, you have those people so that are just researching. And as you get further into the process, so at Eurostar, we would have a lot of dropout when you start seeing the prices. Mm-hmm. And people, just initially, when we did user testing and we did user research, we found that people were just doing qualifying prices, comparing us to flying.
Yeah, what's the cost of it?
Yeah, is the trade-off for the city-to-city journey worth the premium? And so you're right, and then you have a more realistic goal, because you're not saying, I want to get everyone to buy. All I want them to do is be able to see the prices, and if they are very price sensitive, make sure that the Tuesday morning is visible so that they can see there is a low price office if they're willing to do the trade-off, or that you can look. So we looked at developing a monthly view or a weekly view so you could see the different trends, because train companies, airlines, hotels all yield up and down based on demand. So the longer you can look as a consumer, the more you can see if you're price sensitive, when to buy and adapt. And there are some people, if you're retired, for example, you might be flexible and on a budget, and it could still be that Eurostar or EasyJet or whatever is part of that. So the goal was show them the prices and make them. So this was, we used to use an online exit survey.
Yeah.
And you can do these really cheaply or free. And it was, why did you come here today? Were you successful? If not, why not?
Yeah. That's three great questions. Yeah.
3 great questions. I've stolen them from Avanish Kaushik. But they are. And what it says is, what was your goal today? Mm-hmm. Were you successful? So you then have a micro conversion rate that you can say, did this page perform what it should have done?
Yeah.
And the third question is, if you didn't, you then get insight from those customers as to why. You can do something about that. It's actionable insight.
So you would do this when they left the website?
Yeah, so with an exit survey, so you can do it in different ways. And there's lots of, is it going to stop them from doing what they're going to do? Are pop-up surveys annoying? But with the exit surveys, you can do it with a small sample. You can say, do it for 1% or 2% of the traffic. Yeah. If you're a low volume site, you might have to update, increase the volume, and you just take the hit for a short period of time.
Yeah.
Or you can trigger it on movement of the mouse. So JavaScript triggered. If they're going up to switch tabs or close the browser, you can trigger it then.
Yeah.
And you can gather over a period of time quite a lot of insight into where your site isn't doing what your customers want them to do to get them to the next stage of the purchasing journey. And you end up with these micro conversions, which you then understand, what do I need this landing page to do?
Yep.
Why are people coming here? And there might be 15 different reasons. And you can start getting volume metrics of the reasons of why people are coming. So you can prioritize which ones to do first. And you say, right, the purpose of this landing page is to get them to the next stage or show them the price. Yeah. And it allows you to not get lost in things like bounce rate. So on a landing page, a bounce rate can be a good thing.
Yeah.
If people have got the information they wanted and they've left, they'll come back. And so you look at that through the funnel, and then you look where the biggest problem areas are. And
did you incentivize people to fill out this exit survey?
No, because
it just popped up. Do you mind as we ask you these 3 questions?
3 questions.
And would you show all 3 questions at once, or would you do one question then another, or just test it and see which one works best for you?
I would test it. I think there's, from people that are far better at user research than I am, I know there is a correlation between the length of a survey and the completion rate, just like there is with the length of a payment form, as there is, so I would play around it and work with it. But literally it takes, seconds, 30 seconds for someone to fill that out.
Yeah.
And be prepared. If your website isn't great, you will get abuse, death threats, and all those sorts of things that come.
Well, apart from the death threats, you actually want all that information, don't you? Because that's what's going to help you improve and iterate, right? So,
absolute gold. And so we used that at a different place. I've used it in that process in every business I've worked in. And what it helped us to do at Eurostar, probably the biggest win, was to find out what. You can target it as well at different parts of the site. So the first bit, you asked me, how did you use Google Analytics? So the first thing, we looked at that funnel and we said, right, where do we want to improve? So if we saw, a 25% progression from stage 1 of the process to stage 2, it's like, how can we get that to 30?
Yeah.
That's a big drop off. So how can we improve that? And then you do an exit survey just on that part of the site.
Yeah.
Try and understand that. And what we found is there was a big drop off on the payment page. So the previous business I was at, Holiday Extras, it was actually filling out the payment details. So there was a tool that we used, and I don't know if Hotjar does this, where you could actually look at a micro funnel of the payment page. So how many people completed fields 1, 2, 3, 4
okay. Yep.
per page. So you then can say, right, actually the sticking point, I think, was around the address field. And the problem was that actually we didn't have a postcode lookup that worked properly for all geographies. So what Google Analytics allows you to see is where the anomalies are. The quantitative allows you where the anomalies are. So are we seeing a drop-off? So we saw a big drop-off from memory. It was in Germany.
Okay.
So the booking process was working wonderfully for everybody else globally, but not in Germany. So you then narrow down that field of focus and you look into Germany, and we didn't have the right payment methods for Germany.
It was as simple as that.
Simple as that. So they didn't, at the time, there was a culture where credit cards weren't loved in Germany, and they liked Schrift and other sort of payment types. So we needed to implement that to see an uplift. We also managed to identify that there was a big drop-off between pressing the button pay and actually the transaction going through successfully. And that was more looking at working with payment service providers, looking at our fraud rating and how successful we were at putting through legitimate transactions and those sorts of things. So it's using the quant to look at things that look wrong, and then using the qualitative to understand why. So coming back to the product director, what do they do? It's the what and the why. And you use the quant and the qual in combination to
a lot of data by the sounds of it. And one of the examples you gave in our pre-call, which I thought was fascinating, was and maybe you could just expand on this a little bit, was how you talked about on Eurostar, where when you booked the ticket, you had the train displayed in a certain direction. Yeah. But then when you flipped it around,
the thing. I'll be back in a sec.
You're gonna stop that halo effect.
Yeah.
Yeah. For those listening to the podcast, it looked like you were getting raptured. This light shone behind him all of a sudden.
Yeah. It's good sunset.
Yeah. So
Eurostar seat map.
Yes.
So that was I suppose the theory of going through the customer experience and living it yourself. So I was on a train coming back from Paris, and occasionally they let us go in business class, which I was very grateful for. And I was sat there on the train. Is
business class on Eurostar a lot better than normal class?
Yeah.
Just to clarify.
You get the sort of waiter service and the free drinks and food and that sort of stuff.
Okay.
So yeah, and bigger seats and that stuff. So yeah, I was sat on there, and what I noticed is everybody else in the carriage was facing backwards, and I couldn't quite work out why. Because
when you say facing backwards, as in backwards to travel.
Yes, backwards to travel. And I was facing forwards, and I just couldn't work it out. And then in business class, often it's not at full capacity. Mm-hmm. So as the train started to depart, pretty much everybody in the carriage stood up, turned around, and sat in the seat opposite.
So you're like, why didn't you just book that seat in the first place?
Exactly. And, if you're a train manager, I spoke to the train manager and said, does this happen often? They're like, yeah, every day. And it was kind of a communication breakdown. One is from a train manager's point of view, it's inconsequential, it doesn't matter. From a customer's point of view, it's irritating. Mm-hmm. And particularly for that group who may not book for themselves, they might have a PA or an assistant that books for them. And the root cause, when you look through the organisation, the root cause diagnosis was our online seat map. So we had the seat map, and the way that we found that was did more user research and spoke to people, did user testing of different prototypes, looked at other competitors and how they were doing it. And our seat map was horizontal because Eurostar is effectively a shuttle service. So the train goes back and forwards. It has an engine at each end and it goes back and forth. So logically, internally within the business, you go, that makes sense. You have it like that. And it just goes like this. But for customers, they couldn't work out which end was London and which end was Paris. Yep. So they book a seat and it would be facing backwards. And all we did,
50-50 chance of getting the one they wanted.
Yeah. And all we did is we made it vertical.
Yeah.
Because in people's mental models, up is forward. Mm-hmm. And that fixed the problem.
And it solved the problem just by reorientating it, and people could then comprehend which was forwards, which was backwards, and they knew which place to sort of put their seats. I have noticed, I thought it was really clever when you were telling me about it, because I have noticed on the Virgin trains, although it's not a Virgin anymore, is it Avanti? Anyway, whoever it is, they actually draw an arrow saying direction of travel now on the seat maps.
And we tried all of those things because it was actually quite hard to re-engineer it to make it
vertical. But the vertical actually gave you the better results.
Well, yeah. So we tried. So people don't read. Come on, especially on a website.
It's funny that, isn't it?
No, they don't read. So you need a visual interface that's intuitive, that fits with the way they interpret the world. So we tried having arrows. We tried having words. We tried having pop-ups. Saying, "Are you sure?" None of it worked. Stick it horizontally, and people intuitively knew how to use it. Yeah. And that, for me, is great product design, when it's intuitively works and works smoothly.
Yeah, no, that's great. That's a great example. Listen, Neil, I'm aware of time, and I appreciate you giving us so much of your time and giving us all your insight. There's so much packed into what you said, so many ideas, so many website references. And for those of you who want to know what they were, we will endeavor to put them in the show notes on the website at mattedmondson.com. You'll be able to find them there. All the links that Neil mentioned to all the websites, we'll put them in the show notes. So do check them out at mattedmondson.com. Listen, Neil, how do people get hold of you if they want to reach out, connect to you? What's the best way to do that?
I'm on LinkedIn. It's probably the best way. Neil Roberts, Moo. I should pop up.
Just look for Neil at Moo and you'll find him.
Yeah, pretty much. That's probably where I'm most active. Mm-hmm. I do have a Twitter account, but it's very dusty. And yeah,
it is interesting now. Actually, more and more people, when you say to them, it's great, thanks for the show, how do people get hold of you? I would say now the default is everybody's given their LinkedIn details. I'm on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
It's quite interesting. It's not Twitter. It's not really Instagram or Facebook. It's LinkedIn. And as a social media platform amongst business people, it seems to be growing quite rapidly at the moment. Yeah, and I think they're doing some interesting stuff in the way that they're sort of evolving the product to make it easier to network. Yeah. And I think, it's and also the learning platform, I think, is absolutely brilliant. It's one of the best learning platforms.
that I've come across, the thought that they've gone in. So they bought, we partnered with them when they were Linda.
That's what I was going to say. They bought Linda, didn't they?
They bought Linda, but it's just the thought and the execution of where they construct the content on there is really easy and digestible. It's brilliant stuff. So I think they're awesome.
Great. So check Neil out on linkedin.com/Neil at Moo or whatever. We'll put the links again in the show notes, but if you search for Neil Roberts at Moo, you will find him. Neil, thanks so much for your time, bud. It's been an absolute pleasure and a privilege to talk to you. I really, really do appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Enjoyed it.
It's been great. Thank you. So that was our conversation with Mr. Neil Roberts. And as he said, do connect with him on LinkedIn. I'm sure he'd love to connect with you, reach out to you. Wasn't he super generous with his stories about Moo and Eurostar? And I always find it fascinating what the inner workings are and the ideologies that bigger companies have. I do not have 600 people working for me, but I love to hear about how the bigger companies do it, because a lot of the time, do you know what? A lot of those principles still work for us, in the smaller businesses, and it's great. And just some of the stuff he was talking about in terms of improving the customer experience was just utter gold. So next time you're online booking a train ticket, you'll remember the horizontal, the vertical. Next time you're in a queue to use the restroom, the toilet, the bathroom, you'll remember that conversation, right? And you can apply that to your own business in terms of where's the equivalent of the queue, the toilet queue for the ladies on my website? Where is that happening? Because I can tell you this, it will be happening. And using things like Hotjar and analytics and customer surveys, customer focus, exit surveys, all those kind of things to find out, you'll be amazed at what you can do, and just put those principles into action. Now, I'm sort of not doubting. I reckon if you've heard this podcast, you are going to want to hear it again, because there's so much gold in there. And you can subscribe to the podcast wherever you get your podcasts from. If you want to watch the video recording and see the actual video, we will put it on YouTube. It is also on Facebook. And the links to all of those will be in the show notes on my website, mattedmondson.com. Just head on over to mattedmondson.com and you will find out. Just search for Neil. His podcast will come up. All that information is there. Or just head on over to youtube.com/Matt Edmondson if you want to watch the videos. And you'll see all those videos there as well. So thanks for listening. Like I said, make sure you subscribe wherever you get your podcast. Do join us on Facebook Live. Hit the little notification button so you get the dings when we do go live. Sign up to the email list and we'll let you know whenever we're going to do a recording so you can be involved and enjoy those conversations. It's great to be able to bring this content to you. I'm so thankful for my sponsors. Thanks to you guys for watching and to listening and making this show possible so I get to talk to some really amazing people around the world and hear their stories all about e-commerce. Neil was no exception. So thank you so much. God bless you. Good night. And we will see you again real soon.
You've been listening to the eCommerce podcast with Matt Edmondson. Join us next time for more interviews, tips, and tools for building your business online.